The relentless July sun did not caress the rolling hills of Oakhaven, it punished them. It was a heat that had weight, a physical presence that pressed down on the shoulders of anyone foolish enough to venture past their porch steps after 10 in the morning. The air shimmered above the asphalt of County Road 9, distorting the horizon into a watery mirage that promised relief but delivered only more dust. In this baked landscape, where the corn stood yellow and gasping in the fields and the cattle huddled in the singular shade of dying oaks, one structure stood out like a sore thumb, or, as the locals preferred to say, like a scar on the face of the county. It was the farmhouse of Marcus Henderson. To the uninitiated eye, the roof of Marcus's barn looked like the aftermath of a landfill explosion. It was not covered in the traditional slate, nor the ubiquitous corrugated tin that rusted with dignity on the neighboring properties. Instead, it was a chaotic, glittering mosaic of plastic. Thousands of polyethylene terephthalate bottles, standard to liter soda bottles, water bottles, discarded jugs were affixed to the structure, glinting aggressively in the midday glare. From the road, it looked like a shimmering, translucent beast had curled up on top of the barn to die. It was an eyesore. It was a joke. It was the primary source of entertainment for the regulars at Miller's Feed and Seed, who gathered on the loading dock to spit tobacco and shake their heads at the sheer madness of it all. "He's finally cracked," Elias Thorne said one Tuesday, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. Elias had farmed the adjacent plot for 40 years, sticking to the methods his father had taught him: diesel, hard work, and prayer. He looked up at the glittering monstrosity on the hill. "I saw him up there yesterday, hauling another bag of trash, literal trash. Man's lost his pension, lost his wife, and now he's lost his mind. He's building a monument to garbage." The men around him chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. "Reckon he thinks he's gonna float away when the flood comes." Another asked, kicking at a loose stone. "Maybe he's trying to signal aliens. Tell him there's no intelligent life down here, just a crazy old coot gluing trash to his shingles." They laughed because it was easier than pity. They laughed because Marcus Henderson had once been a man of status in the town, a structural engineer who had traveled 2 cities they had only seen on television. A man who spoke of load-bearing walls and tensile strength with a reverence most men reserved for scripture, but that was before the plant closed. Before the medical bills piled up like snowdrifts in a blizzard. Before the banks started sending letters printed on pink paper that smelled of foreclosure. Now, Marcus was just the crazy guy on the hill, the man who scavenged through the recycling bins behind the diner, the man who spent his days washing garbage in a tin tub while the rest of the world tried to hold on to what little dignity they had left. But Marcus Henderson could not hear their laughter. He was too high up, perched precariously on a scaffolding made of reclaimed 2x4s, staring into the heart of a clear plastic bottle. The temperature on the roof was 115 degrees. The soles of his boots felt tacky against the tar paper. Sweat ran into his eyes, stinging like acid, but his hands were steady. He wasn't building a roof. He wasn't building a sculpture. He was building a lens. He held the bottle up to the sun. It was filled with a precise mixture of distilled water and bleach, sealed with a marine-grade epoxy he had bartered an antique pocket watch to obtain. The light hit the curved surface of the plastic, bent through the water, and refracted. It didn't just pass through. It intensified. It focused. Marcus wasn't seeing trash. He was seeing physics. He was seeing the refraction of light, the bending of waves, the harnessing of a power that was currently burning his crops and drying his well. He was seeing a way out. He adjusted the angle of the bottle, slotting it into a custom-cut hole in the plywood sheeting. Beneath the bottle, inside the dark attic space of the barn, lay a network of copper tubing painted matte black, intertwined with scavenged photovoltaic cells taken from broken garden lights and discarded roadside construction signs. The bottle acted as a concentrator, a primitive but effective magnifying glass that took the weak, diffused light and hammered it into a beam of intense energy, directing it onto the cells and the tubing. "Let them laugh," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking from dehydration. He picked up his caulking gun, the metal hot enough to blister skin. Let them laugh while they pay the electric company for the privilege of running an air conditioner that can't keep up. Let them laugh while their diesel generators run dry. He drove a screw into the mounting bracket, the sound of the drill whining in the silent heat. He had 3,412 bottles to go. The motivation for this madness had not come in a flash of inspiration, but in a slow, grinding realization of obsolescence. 6 years prior, Marcus had been laid off. The engineering firm he had dedicated 3 decades of his life to had pivoted to software, to digital architecture, leaving men of steel and concrete behind. He had retired to the small farm he had inherited, thinking the land would provide, but the land was fickle. The soil was depleted, and the cost of modern farming was a game rigged for the corporate giants. The winter of 2009 had been the breaking point. An ice storm had snapped the power lines like dry twigs. For 9 days, the Henderson farmhouse had been a freezer. Marcus and his wife, Sarah, had huddled under blankets, burning furniture and the wood stove to keep the frost from the windows. The generator had failed on the second day, a clogged carburetor he couldn't fix with frozen fingers. Sarah had caught pneumonia. She recovered, mostly, but the fear had never left Marcus's bones. The feeling of absolute helplessness, of relying on a grid that didn't care if he lived or died, of relying on fuel he couldn't afford. He had started reading. He went to the county library, ignoring the pitying looks of the librarian, and checked out books on optics, on thermodynamics, on alternative energy. He couldn't afford solar panels. A professional installation was $40,000. He didn't have $40 to spare. He needed something else. He needed to hack the system. He found the concept in an old scientific journal from the 1970s, a footnote about solar concentration using fluid lenses. It was theoretical, impractical for commercial use because of the maintenance required. But Marcus had time, he had infinite time, and he had trash. The preparation phase had been humiliating. He had become a scavenger. He drove his rusted pickup truck behind the local high school after football games, digging through the bins for soda bottles. He negotiated with the manager of the recycling center, trading fresh eggs for the right to pick through the plastics. He needed uniformity to liter bottles, clear, no dents. Then came the cleaning. The barn smelled of bleach for months. He built a soaking system using rainwater, scrubbing every label, every ring of adhesive, every speck of sugar residue. If the water wasn't clear, the light wouldn't focus. If the light didn't focus, the heat wouldn't generate. It was tedious, back-breaking work. His hands became raw, the skin peeling away to reveal pink, tender flesh that bled when he gripped the scrubbing brush. He sketched the schematics on the back of unpaid utility bills. He calculated the focal length of a 2-liter bottle filled with water. He adjusted for the refraction index of the bleach solution, added to prevent algae growth. He realized that a single bottle, properly positioned, could act as a 60-watt light bulb during the day that was the leader of light concept used in developing nations. But Marcus wanted more. He didn't just want light. He wanted power. He wanted to trap the heat. He designed a dual system. The light that passed through the bottle would hit a suspended array of black copper pipes. The concentrated solar energy would superheat the water inside the pipes, creating steam pressure to turn a small, refurbished turbine he had salvaged from an old washing machine motor. Simultaneously, the scattered light that missed the pipes would illuminate the barn interior, meaning he needed zero electricity for lighting. It was a delicate balance. Too much heat and the plastic would melt. Too little and the turbine wouldn't spin. He built prototypes in his kitchen, blinding himself with reflected light, burning holes in the linoleum table. He failed. He failed again. The first prototype leaked, ruining the drywall. The second one exploded from pressure build-up, sending shards of plastic shrapnel into the ceiling fan, but Marcus Henderson was an engineer. Failure was just data. He adjusted the mixture. He reinforced the seals. He added a pressure release valve made from a modified tire stem. By the time he started installation on the roof, he was a ghost of his former self. He was thinner, his skin leathery and dark from the sun, his eyes burning with a fanatical intensity. He stopped going to church because he couldn't stand the whispered prayers for his sanity. He stopped going to the diner because he couldn't afford the coffee. He existed on the roof, a man possessed by the conviction that the plastic beneath his hands was not garbage but gold. The construction process was a slow agony. The roof of the barn was steep, a 45-degree pitch that required a harness he had fashioned from old seat belts. Every morning, he climbed the ladder at dawn, hauling a crate of prepared bottles. Week 1 was the layout. He stripped the old shingles, exposing the raw wood. He laid down a reflective foil barrier insulation he had stripped from a condemned trailer parked down the highway. The foil was blinding in the sun, turning the roof into a mirror that baked him from below as the sun baked him from above. Week 2 was the framing. He had to build a grid to hold the bottles. He couldn't afford treated lumber, so he milled his own strips from a fallen cedar tree in the back pasture. He cut thousands of circles, his jigsaw screaming in protest, the sawdust coating him like powdered sugar. The measurements had to be exact. If the hole was too big, the bottle would slip through. If it was too small, the plastic would buckle under the thermal expansion. "Hey, Marcus," a voice called out from the road during the 3rd week. It was Sheriff Brody, leaning out the window of his patrol car. The air conditioner in the cruiser was humming, a sound of luxury that made Marcus's teeth ache. "We got a noise complaint. Some folks say you're banging around up here at all hours, disturbing the peace." Marcus looked down, a drill in one hand, a bottle in the other. "I'm fixing my roof, Sheriff. Last I checked, a man's allowed to fix his roof." "Fixing it with trash," Brody laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, Marcus, Sarah's worried about you. Her sister called me, said you're up here talking to yourself, said you're gonna get heat stroke and fall off. Why don't you come down? We can get you some help. Maybe get you on some assistance for the bills." "I don't need assistance," Marcus said, his voice flat. "I need energy, and I'm getting it." "It's plastic bottles, son," the sheriff said, his tone softening to one of pity. "It's just plastic. It ain't gonna do nothing but leak." "We'll see," Marcus said, and turned his back on the law. He kept building. He installed the copper piping, soldering the joints with a trembling hand. He didn't have enough money for new solder, so he melted down old plumbing fixtures, skimming the slag off the top. He built the turbine housing from a discarded beer keg. He wired the electrical system using cables jumped from old car batteries. The technical challenges were immense. The water in the bottles expanded when it got hot. He had to create an expansion chamber for each row of bottles, a reservoir system that allowed the fluid to breathe without bursting the seals. He used for bags he had found in the dumpster behind the veterinary clinic, connecting them with aquarium tubing. It looked like the circulatory system of a cyborg giant. By week 6, the roof was half covered. The weight was becoming an issue. Water is heavy 8 pounds per gallon. He was adding tons of weight to a structure built in the 1950s. Marcus had to go into the barn's interior and reinforce the rafters. He installed cross-bracing, using chain hoists to crank the sagging beams back into place. He worked by the light of a kerosene lantern, the shadows dancing on the walls, the groaning of the wood sounding like the complaints of a dying animal. He made mistakes. A seal failed on the western quadrant, leaking bleach water onto the hay below, ruining $100 worth of winter feed. He sat in the wet hay and cried for 10 minutes, the only time he allowed himself to break. Then he stood up, wiped his face, and climbed back up the ladder. He couldn't stop. He had spent his savings on the epoxy. He had spent his reputation on the idea. There was no going back. The community's skepticism hardened into hostility. They felt his project was an affront to their way of life. It was too weird, too desperate. It reminded them of how close they all were to the edge. If a man like Marcus Henderson could fall this far, what hope did they have? They started avoiding the road that ran past his farm. They told their children not to look at the glass house. It became a local boogeyman, a symbol of ruin. But as August rolled in, bringing with it a humidity that felt like breathing soup, the system began to come online. Marcus finished the last row of bottles on a Tuesday evening. The sun was setting, casting long, golden rays across the fields. He connected the final loop of the copper exchange to the beer keg turbine. He opened the valve. He went down to the basement, where he had arranged a bank of 12 deep cycle marine batteries, the only new things he had bought, paid for by selling his grandfather's shotgun. He stared at the charge controller. Nothing. The needle lay dead at 0. He checked the connections. He checked the turbine. He climbed back onto the roof in the twilight, frantically searching for a blockage. He found nothing. He sat on the peak of the roof, his head in his hands, watching the fireflies dance in the darkening air. He had failed. It was just trash. The sheriff was right. It was just a pile of garbage on a barn. He slept in the barn that night, too exhausted to walk to the house. He woke with the sun. A low hum filled the air. A vibration that he could feel in his teeth. Marcus bolted upright. He scrambled to the pressure gauge on the copper line. 40 psi, the sun was hitting the eastern slope. The bottles were catching the morning light, refracting it, concentrating it onto the black pipes. The water inside was flashing to steam. He ran to the turbine. It was spinning, a blur of silver. He ran to the battery bank. The needle on the charge controller was dancing. 12 volts, 13 volts, 14 for volts, charging. He ran to the breaker panel he had installed on the wall. He flipped the main switch. Overhead, a row of shop lights flickered and roared to life. Not the weak, yellow light of the grid during a brownout, but a bright, steady, Humphrey illumination. Marcus stood in the center of the barn, bathed in the artificial light generated by the trash on his roof. He looked at his hands, covered in cuts and grease. He looked at the meter, spinning backwards. He wasn't just generating enough power for the barn. He was generating enough to run the house and the pump, and the neighbor's house if they had a cable long enough. But the real test was yet to come. The heat was just a prelude. The sky to the west was turning a bruised, ugly purple. The birds had stopped singing. The air pressure was dropping so fast his ears popped. The crisis was not economic. It was atmospheric. The great storm of 2011 was not a hurricane, but a Derico, a straight-line windstorm that swept across the Midwest with the force of an atomic blast. It moved faster than warnings could travel. It tore roofs off gymnasiums. It snapped oak trees that had stood since the Civil War, and it was heading straight for Oak Haven. The first sign was the temperature drop. In 10 minutes, the mercury plunged 20 degrees. Then came the wind. It didn't howl, it screamed. A solid wall of dust and debris hit the farm. Marcus was in the kitchen when the lights flickered and died. The grid was gone. Somewhere down the line, a transformer had exploded. The house went dark. Sarah screamed as a tree branch smashed through the living room window, spraying glass across the floor. Marcus, the storm cellar. No, Marcus shouted over the roar of the wind. The barn. We have to get to the barn. Are you crazy? She yelled, grabbing his arm. That roof will fly apart. It's covered in loose plastic. Trust me. He grabbed her hand and dragged her out the back door. The wind nearly knocked them off their feet. Rain was falling horizontally, stinging like buckshot. They fought their way across the yard, the mud sucking at their boots. They threw open the barn door and collapsed inside. The noise was deafening, the sound of the wind tearing at the world outside. But inside, inside, the lights were on. The shop lights were blazing. The fan Marcus had rigged to the turbine system was whirring, circulating dry air. How? Sarah gasped, wiping wet hair from her face. She looked up at the ceiling. The roof was holding. The aerodynamic profile of the bottles, which Marcus had obsessively calculated, acted like thousands of tiny dimples on a golf ball. Instead of catching the wind and lifting the roof, they broke the airflow, creating a turbulent boundary layer that held the structure down. The bottles weren't flying off. They were vibrating, humming, but they held, but the town was not so lucky. Through the crack in the barn door, Marcus watched the world fall apart. He saw the transformer on the pole down the road spark and die. He saw the roof of Elias Thorne's perfectly maintained barn peel back like the lid of a sardine can. He saw the darkness swallow the valley. For 3 days, the storm raged, followed by a deluge of rain that turned the county into a swamp. The power lines were down everywhere. Bridges were washed out. Oak Haven was cut off. The temperature plummeted. Without power, the furnaces in the homes stopped working. The pumps stopped working. The town was dark, cold, and without water, except for the Henderson farm. On the second night, a knock came at the barn door. It was Elias Thorne. He was soaked to the bone, shivering, holding a lantern with a dead battery. "Marcus," he called out, his voice trembling. I saw ... I saw a light. Marcus opened the door. The warmth from the barn spilled out into the freezing rain. Behind Marcus, the lights were bright. A hot plate was boiling a pot of coffee. A small electric heater was humming. Elias stared. He looked at the lights. He looked at the coffee. He looked at Marcus, my wife. Elias stammered. "She's on oxygen. The tank ... The concentrator needs power. The battery backup died 4 hours ago. I didn't know where else to go. I saw the glow from the hill." "Bring her," Marcus said immediately. "Bring her now." Within an hour, the Henderson barn had become a refugee camp. Elias brought his wife. The widow Higgins came with her 3 cats. The sheriff brought a family whose trailer had been crushed by a pine tree. They sat on hay bales, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot coffee brewed with water pumped by the solar thermal engine. They charged their phones on the power strip Marcus had nailed to a post, desperate to call relatives to tell them they were alive. They looked up at the ceiling, at the underside of the strange, trash-covered roof. They could hear the rain hammering against the plastic, but inside, it was dry. It was warm. It was bright. "How?" Elias asked again, holding a steaming mug with both hands. "How is this possible, Marcus? It's dark outside. There's no sun." "Thermal mass," Marcus explained, pointing to the large insulated water tank in the corner of the barn. "The system ran all day yesterday before the clouds got too thick. We superheated 500 gallons of water. That tank acts like a battery. It's releasing heat now to spin the turbine at low RPM and keeping the radiator warm. And the bottles ... They catch even the ambient light from the moon and the lightning. They trap it." Elias looked at the man he had mocked. He looked at the man he had called crazy. Tears welled up in the old farmer's eyes. "I'm sorry, Marcus, I'm so sorry." "Drink your coffee, Elias," Marcus said gently. The validation was absolute. For 5 days, until the National Guard could cut a way through to the town, the Henderson farm was the only source of power in a 20-mile radius. Marcus's landfill in the sky kept 19 people alive. It kept the oxygen concentrator running. It kept the insulin in the mini fridge cold. It cooked the food that the neighbors brought from their thawing freezers. When the sun finally came out on the 6th day, the snow and ice on the roofs of the neighboring houses began to melt, causing leaks and water damage. But on Marcus's roof, the snow slid right off the slick plastic curves of the bottles. The system immediately spiked back to full power, the batteries topping off in 2 hours. The utility trucks arrived a week later. The linemen stared up at the barn, scratching their heads in bewilderment. They had never seen anything like it. A grid tie inspector came out, clipboard in hand, ready to write a citation for unpermitted work. He spent 2 hours inspecting the soldering, the pressure valves, the bottle seals. He left without writing a ticket. He just shook Marcus's hand and drove away. The legacy of the Henderson array began quietly. It didn't start with a viral video or a news crew, though those came later. It started with Elias Thorne asking Marcus to help him save his own barn. "I can't pay you much," Elias said, looking at his own ruined roof. "But I got plenty of trash, and I got 2 hands," Marcus smiled. "I don't want your money, Elias. I want your bottles." They rebuilt Elias's roof. Then they did the community center. The local high school shop class got involved. Marcus taught the kids the physics of refraction. He taught them how to mix the bleach solution. He taught them that innovation isn't about buying the newest gadget. It's about looking at what you have even if what you have is garbage and seeing the potential energy locked inside. The Oakhaven method spread. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't HOA approved. But in rural communities where the profit margins were thin and the grid was unreliable, it was a godsend. Farmers started modifying the design. One used glass jars for better thermal retention. Another integrated an algae growth system inside the bottles to produce biodiesel fuel while generating heat. Marcus Henderson never patented the design. When a solar company offered him a contract to buy the intellectual property, he laughed. "It's not property," he told the suit-wearing executive standing in his driveway. "It's survival. You can't patent the sun, and you can't patent trash." He posted the schematics online for free. He included the mistakes. He included the warning about the bleach mixture. He included the exact angle of the dangle. Years later, when Marcus was too old to climb the ladder, he would sit on his porch in the evening. The valley below him twinkled, not just with the orange glow of sodium streetlights, but with the soft, white luminescence of bottle roofs scattered across the hills. They looked like stars that had fallen to earth and decided to stay. He had been ridiculed. He had been ostracized. He had covered his home in the refuse of a wasteful society. But in doing so, he had turned the symbol of consumption, the disposable plastic bottle, into a tool of production. He had proven that the difference between a crazy man and a genius is often just a matter of atmospheric pressure. The neighbors didn't laugh anymore. When they drove past the Henderson place, they slowed down. They looked up at the glittering plastic mosaic that crowned the barn, catching the last rays of the dying sun. They didn't see a landfill. They saw a lighthouse. The barometer in the hallway of the farmhouse had been a wedding gift from Sarah's father, a brass-encased instrument from the 1940s that Marcus had calibrated with obsessive precision. He tapped the glass. The needle didn't just move, it plummeted. It dropped past rain and whined, diving deep into a sector of the dial that rarely saw use. The air in the house grew heavy, a static charge building up that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was the silence that was wrong. The cicadas, usually a deafening buzzsaw in the July heat, had cut out completely. The birds were gone. The wind chimes on the porch were dead still. "It's dropping too fast," Marcus muttered, grabbing his heavy canvas coat from the hook. "Sarah, get the emergency kit. Fill the bathtub, now." Sarah didn't argue. She had seen that look in his eyes before the engineer's assessment of catastrophic failure probabilities. She moved to the bathroom while Marcus ran for the back door. He didn't run to the cellar, he ran to the barn. The structure loomed against a sky that was turning the color of a fresh bruised purple, green, and black, swirling in a way that clouds shouldn't swirl. The plastic bottles on the roof, usually glittering and cheerful, now looked alien, a strange, crystalline growth waiting for the impact. Marcus hit the barn door, sliding the heavy timber latch. Inside, the air was different. It was warm, dry, and smelled of ozone and heated pine. He sprinted to the control panel he had mounted on the main support beam. He needed to check the structural integrity sensors, simple strain gauges he had rigged up using guitar strings and piezoelectric buzzers. If the roof started to lift, the pitch of the hum would change. Currently, it was a low, steady drone. He threw the diversion lever. "System isolation," he said aloud, a habit from his days at the firm. He was disconnecting the barn's grid from the house's main feed to prevent a surge from the utility lines from frying his inverter. He was islanding the system. Outside, the first gust hit. It wasn't a ramp up, it was a hammer blow. The barn groaned, a deep, resonant sound of wood compressing under immense lateral force. The tin siding rattled like a machine gun. Marcus looked up at the underside of the roof. The rafters were vibrating. He could see the dust dancing off the beams. But the bottles were doing exactly what he had calculated but never tested: aerodynamic dimpling. The wind, hitting the irregular surface of the thousands of curved plastic bottoms, was breaking up into turbulent microeddies. Instead of flowing smoothly over the roof and creating a low-pressure zone that would lift the structure, the Bernoulli principle that tore roofs off houses, the turbulence was keeping the pressure equalized. The roof wasn't lifting, it was hunkering down. Then the darkness hit. It wasn't just the clouds. The transformer at the end of the county road blew. Marcus heard the pop hiss sound, followed by the complete erasure of the security light that usually illuminated the feed lot. Inside the barn, the lights flickered once. The inverter beeped a high-pitched alarm signaling the loss of AC input. Then, the relay clicked, clack, the hum of the battery bank took over, the lights stabilized. 12 heavy-duty marine batteries, scavenged and restored, were now dumping 24 volts into the system, inverted to 120. The barn remained an island of light in a sea of sudden, violent void. Marcus checked the thermal storage. The water tank in the corner, an old dairy milk tank insulated with 6 layers of spray foam, was sitting at 190 degrees Fahrenheit. He had captured the entire day's solar radiation. He opened the valve to the radiant floor loop he had buried under the dirt floor of the workshop area. Even if the temperature outside dropped 40 degrees in the next hour, the thermal mass of the floor would radiate heat for 2 days. The door banged open. Sarah stumbled in, drenched, clutching a plastic tote bin. The wind caught the door, nearly ripping it from the hinges. Marcus lunged, grabbing the handle and heaving it shut against the gale. He threw the deadbolt. The house windows, Sarah gasped, wiping mud from her face. The pressure ... the big picture window in the living room just bowed in. I heard the glass cracking. I grabbed the medical kit and ran. "You're safe here," Marcus said, guiding her to the workbench where he had set up a makeshift command center. "Look," he pointed to the gauges. "Batteries at 98%, thermal mass at saturation. Structural load is high, but within tolerance. We have power. We have heat. We have light." Sarah looked around the barn. For years, she had defended him, but she had also doubted. She had watched him glue trash to the roof and wondered if she was enabling a breakdown. Now, standing in the warm, bright workspace while the world outside sounded like it was being fed into a wood chipper, she understood. It wasn't madness, it was preparation. "The neighbors," she whispered, her eyes widening. "Marcus, the Thorns, they rely on the grid for everything. Their well pump is electric." Marcus looked at the storm radar on his laptop powered by the roof. The cell was massive, a Derico, a straight-line wind event with hurricane force gusts. "They won't be able to drive. The trees will be down across the road. We have to signal them," Sarah said. Marcus nodded. He went to the breaker panel. He flipped a switch-labeled beacon. On the very peak of the roof, above the layer of bottles, Marcus had installed a high-intensity LED strobe light salvaged from a decommissioned radio tower. It was shielded in a polycarbonate dome. He hit the switch. Outside, in the screaming darkness, a rhythmic, piercing pulse of white light began to flash. 1 second on, 1 second off, a lighthouse in the storm. 40 minutes later, the first refugees arrived. It was Elias Thorne and his wife, Martha. They didn't drive, they had crawled. The wind had toppled a massive oak across their driveway, crushing their pickup truck. They had walked the quarter-mile through the mud and the flying debris, guided only by the flashing strobe atop Marcus's barn. When Marcus opened the door, Elias fell into the room. He was a big man, proud and stubborn, but he looked small now. His jacket was shredded where he had snagged it on barbed wire in the dark. Martha was wheezing, her face pale, her lips blue. "Oxygen," Elias choked out, pointing to the portable tank slung over his shoulder. "Empty. The home unit ... power's gone. She can't. She can't breathe, Marcus." Marcus didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for an apology for the months of ridicule. He pointed to the workbench. "Put her there." "Sarah, get the nebulizer adapter." Marcus had anticipated this. He grabbed an extension cord from the reel. He plugged it into the pure sine wave inverter outlet, clean power, safe for medical electronics. He took the plug of the portable oxygen concentrator Elias had dragged with them and jammed it into the socket. The machine beeped, a green light flared. The compressor hummed to life. Martha took a shuddering breath, holding the mask to her face. Her chest heaved, then settled. The color began to return to her cheeks. Elias slumped against a hay bale, water dripping from his nose. He looked up at the ceiling, at the underside of the plywood sheeting where the bottoms of the bottles poked through like 1,000 strange, glowing eyes. The ambient light from the room was catching in the water-filled plastic, refracting and scattering, making the ceiling glow with a soft, diffuse luminescence. "I thought you were crazy," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "I told everyone at the diner you were building a monument to garbage. I laughed at you, Marcus." "Technically," Marcus said, checking the voltage readout, "it is garbage. It just happens to be garbage that refracts light and traps thermal energy." "It's warm," Elias said, peeling off his wet gloves. "How is it warm?" "The heater in my house died the second the lines went down." "Fluid dynamics," Marcus said, his tone clinical to hide the emotion he felt. "The water in the bottles on the roof absorbs the infrared spectrum. It transfers that heat into the loop. The floor you're standing on is 80 degrees. The barn is a battery, Elias, not just for electricity, but for heat." The validation wasn't a trophy. It was the sound of Martha Thorne breathing. The storm raged for 6 hours. The wind speeds clocked at 90 miles per hour. The rain was torrential, a deluge that turned the county roads into rivers. By midnight, the barn held 14 people. The Sheriff Brody had arrived with the Millers, whose roof had been peeled off like a soup can lid. Then came the young couple from the rental property down the lane, clutching a shivering beagle. The barn, designed for storage and workspace, transformed into a microcosm of survival. Marcus directed the chaos with the same precision he had used to build the array. "Miller, grab those tarps from the corner. We need to partition the sleeping area. Sarah, ration the coffee. We have 40 gallons of potable water in the reserve tank, but we don't know how long the grid will be down. Use the induction plate, not the propane backup. We save the gas for absolute emergencies. We have plenty of electrons." Sheriff Brody stood by the door, watching the storm through the reinforced peephole. He turned to Marcus, his uniform soaked, his radio dead. "The station is dark," Brody said. "The backup generator at the precinct failed. I can't reach dispatch." "Marcus, you're the only localized power source I can see for 10 miles. "The array is holding," Marcus said, tapping the laptop screen. "Wind load is high, but the aerodynamic drag is lower than predicted. The bottles are shedding the wind shear." "You have internet?" Brody asked, staring at the laptop. "Satellite uplink," Marcus said. "Powered by the DC bus. I'm tracking the front. It's going to stall over us. We're looking at 3 days of rain and flooding." Brody shook his head. "I came up here last week to tell you to tear this down. Cited code violations. Unpermitted roofing materials, aesthetic nuisance." "I remember," Marcus said. "I used the citation notice to shim the battery rack. It was good card stock." Brody laughed, a hollow, exhausted sound. "Well, don't expect to find this week. Do you have enough power to charge radios?" "If I can get my handset charged, I might be able to relay to the state police repeater. Plug it in," Marcus said. "We have 15 kilowatt hours in the bank, and the wind turbine I rigged on the silo is actually producing now that the wind is steady." The night dragged on. The sensory experience inside the barn was surreal. Outside, the violence of nature was absolute, the roar of wind, the crack of snapping timber, the relentless drumming of rain. Inside, it was a sanctuary of soft, refracted light and the gentle hum of cooling fans. Marcus didn't sleep. He patrolled the perimeter of the interior, checking for leaks. There were a few. A seal on the north quadrant had cracked under the vibration, dripping bleach water onto the concrete. Marcus placed a bucket under it and made a note on his clipboard. "Use marine silicone 5000 to 100 next time. Standard caulk to brittle for high wind vibration." He watched his neighbors. People who had avoided eye contact with him for months were now huddled under his roof, drinking his water, warming their hands on his radiant floor. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a profound sense of responsibility. He had built the ark, now he had to make sure it didn't sink. At 3 a.m., a crisis within the crisis emerged. The temperature outside dropped sharply as the eye of the storm passed and the cold front slammed in. The thermal mass in the floor was holding, but the heat lost through the uninsulated metal walls of the barn, which he hadn't finished retrofitting, was accelerating. Temperature is dropping, Sarah whispered, watching the monitor. Interior is down to 62. The children are cold, Mrs. Miller said, clutching her two daughters. Marcus looked at the battery bank. 60% charge. It was night, no solar input. The wind turbine was helping, but not enough to run the electric resistance heaters he had as backups. We need to boost the thermal loop, Marcus said. I have to engage the compost heat recovery. The what? Elias asked. The pile, Marcus said, behind the workshop wall. I built a Zhangpain mound. He led Elias and the sheriff to the back of the barn. There was a massive, enclosed wooden crib filled with wood chips, soaked hay, and manure. It smelled earthy, pungent, but not foul. Buried inside the mound were coils of polyethylene pipe. Bacterial decomposition, Marcus explained, turning a series of valves on the manifold. The bacteria breaking down this would generate heat. It gets up to 140 degrees in the center of that pile. I usually keep it bypassed because it's hard to regulate, but we need the BTS. He opened the valve. The pump word, circulating the water from the floor loop through the compost pile. They watched the thermometer on the return line. 60 degrees, 65 degrees. 72 degrees ... The water returning from the pile was hot. The decomposition of organic matter, literal rotting trash and poop, was harvesting the energy of biology. You're heating us with ... manure, Brody asked, watching the gauge rise. I'm heating us with life, Marcus corrected. It's the same heat that warms your body. Metabolism, just on a larger scale. Within an hour, the ambient temperature in the barn stabilized at a comfortable 68 degrees. The children stopped shivering. The crisis was managed. Daybreak brought a gray, watery light, but no sun. The rain continued, relentless and cold. Marcus opened the main barn doors just enough to look out. The devastation was total. The landscape of Oakhaven had been rewritten. The Thorns barn was a pile of splinters. The power lines were a tangled mess of copper spaghetti on the road. The silence was back, but now it was the silence of a dead grid. No power for weeks, Brody assessed, standing beside Marcus. The substation is underwater. The poles are snapped like toothpicks. We have food, Marcus said. We have heat. But the batteries will drain if we don't get sun today. It's overcast, Elias said, looking at the thick gray blanket of clouds. Your bottles ... they need sun, don't they? Direct sun is best, Marcus said, but that's why I used the 2-liter bottles. They aren't just lenses, they are volumetric traps. They catch diffuse UV radiation. We won't get full power, but we'll get something. He walked over to the inverter display. Input, 200 watts. It wasn't much. It wasn't the 4,000 watts he got on a clear day, but it was a trickle. It's enough to keep the fridge running and the phones charged, Marcus said. We go into conservation mode, lights off during the day. No heavy appliances, we huddle. The next 3 days were a blur of community living. The barn became the town square. As the flood waters receded slightly, more people walked up the hill. They brought what they had: frozen meat from thawing freezers, cans of beans, blankets. Marcus's workshop became a communal kitchen. The women organized a cooking rotation using the single induction burner and a slow cooker. The men formed salvage teams, going out to check on livestock and bring back supplies, then returning to the warmth of the bottle barn at night. The validation of Marcus's work came in the form of a graph. On the third day, a technician from the Rural Electric Cooperative managed to get a truck up the road. He was assessing damage, marking deadlines. He walked into the barn, expecting to find misery. He found a pot of chili simmering. He found kids playing cards on a warm floor. He found a row of cell phones charging on a power strip. I don't understand, the technician said. Looking at the breaker panel, the whole county is black. How are you pulling this load? Marcus took him outside. The rain had stopped, the clouds were thinning. A shaft of sunlight hit the roof. The reaction was instantaneous. The bottles, wet with rain, caught the light. The entire roof seemed to ignite with a diamond-like brilliance. It was blinding. Inside, the inverter hum changed pitch. Input 3,800 watts, the bottles, Marcus said, pointing up. Refraction concentration, passive solar thermal. It cost me $12 in epoxy and 6 months of dumpster diving. The technician took off his hard hat. I've been installing solar for 10 years. Panels, silicon, high-tech stuff. I've never seen anything put out this kind of amperage on a cloudy day. Silicon needs direct excitement, Marcus said. Water and plastic just need light. It's low efficiency per square inch, sure. But I have 3,000 square feet of capture area. Quantity has a quality all its own. The weeks that followed the storm changed the psychology of Oak Haven forever. The grid didn't come back on for 19 days. In that time, the Henderson farm wasn't just a shelter. It was a school. Elias Thorne was the first student. He didn't just want to be warm, he wanted to understand. He spent hours with Marcus learning the schematics, why the bleach. Elias asked one afternoon, scrubbing a scavenged bottle for a repair. Refractive index and by a side, Marcus explained. Water refracts light, but algae grows in sunlight. The bleach kills the algae. If the water goes green, you lose the heat. It has to stay crystal clear and the expansion. Air gap, Marcus sketched it on a piece of plywood. Leave 1 inch of air at the top. When the water freezes or boils, it needs room to move. If you fill it to the brim, the bottle bursts. They weren't just passing time. They were planning. Elias had lost his barn. He needed to rebuild. I can't afford a metal roof, Elias said, looking at the pile of debris that was once his livelihood. Insurance is gonna fight me on act of God clauses. You don't need metal, Marcus said. The high school football stadium produces 4,000 empty water bottles every Friday night. The recycling center charges the town to haul them away. We can get them for free. You think we can do this on my place? I think Marcus said we can do this on every place. The glass barn project began before the power even came back on. It started with a crew of 4, Marcus, Elias, Sheriff Brody, who was handy with a saw, and a teenager named Kyle who had shown an aptitude for the wiring. They stripped the ruined rafters of Elias's barn. They reinforced the trusses. And then the community started to bring the bottles. It became a ritual. Instead of throwing plastics in the bin, the townspeople washed them. They removed the labels. They brought them to the Henderson farm in bags, in truck beds, in wagons. It was a tithe of trash. Marcus became the architect of a new aesthetic. He taught them how to cut the mounting holes with a hole saw. He taught them how to mix the ceiling compound using roofing tar and gasoline when the epoxy ran out a dirtier but effective sealant. By the time the utility trucks reconnected the main transformer, Elias Thorne's new barn was halfway done. When the grid power hummed back to life, Elias didn't cheer. He flipped the main breaker on his panel to OFF. I think I'll stay on the bottled juice for a while, Elias told the lineman. It's cheaper, and it doesn't quit when the wind blows. The legacy of Marcus Henderson did not result in a fortune. He didn't become a tech billionaire. In fact, he remained a humble farmer until the end of his days. But the impact of his obsession rippled out in ways he could never have engineered. 2 years after the storm, the state university sent a team of researchers to Oak Haven. They had heard rumors of a distributed solar thermal network operating off the grid. They expected to find expensive Tesla walls and high-efficiency panels. What they found was a patchwork of glistening roofs, the community center, the volunteer fire department, 3 dozen homes, all covered in the mosaic of PET plastic. The lead researcher, a Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation to Elias, a coincidence that amused the locals, interviewed Marcus on his porch. The efficiency metrics are confusing, Dr. Thorne said, looking at his tablet. Individually, these bottles are terrible solar collectors. They lose heat. The plastic degrades UV, but collectively, your thermal loop efficiency is rivaling commercial systems that cost 50 times as much. How? Redundancy, Marcus said, rocking in his chair. And accessibility. A high-tech panel breaks, you need a technician and $1,000. A bottle breaks, you drink a soda and glue a new one in. Resilience isn't about perfection, doctor. It's about repairability. But the aesthetics, the doctor noted. It looks ... like trash. Marcus smiled. Like a diamond, the doctor corrected. From the satellite imagery, this town sparkles like a geode. The Oakhaven model was published in engineering journals. It was derided by some as poverty engineering, but celebrated by others as the ultimate expression of the circular economy. Marcus's philosophy on sharing the knowledge was simple: open source everything. He refused to trademark the mounting system. He refused to patent the specific fluid mixture. If you lock the door to the library, Marcus told a journalist from a national magazine, you can't blame people for being ignorant. I didn't invent refraction. God did. I just put it in a bottle. As the years passed, the technology evolved. The younger generation, the kids who had weathered the storm in Marcus's barn, took the idea further. Kyle, the teenager who helped wear the barns, went to engineering school. He returned 5 years later with a new design, a 3D printed adapter that allowed square bottles to snap together like Lego bricks, eliminating the need for the wooden frame and the messy tar. They called it the Henderson Clip. Marcus lived to see the installation of the array on the new wing of the elementary school. He was 82 years old, walking with a cane, his hands gnarled from arthritis and decades of work. The town held a ceremony. They didn't give him a plaque. They gave him a bottle of gold-plated Toledo cast in bronze mounted on a piece of the original barn wood. The inscription read, "To the man who saw the light when we only saw the garbage." Marcus died 3 winters later, peacefully in his sleep. It was a cold night, 20 below zero, but his room was warm. The radiant floor, fed by the heat trapped in 10,000 bottles, kept the chill at bay. At his funeral, it began to rain. As the procession moved from the church to the cemetery, the clouds broke. The sun came out, fierce and bright, and as the light hit the valley, the roofs of Oakhaven lit up. One by one, from the fire station to the farms, the buildings began to glow. A field of terrestrial stars answering the sun, it was a blinding, beautiful salute. The lesson Marcus left behind wasn't about recycling. It wasn't even about energy. It was about the danger of dismissal. He taught a community that the solutions to their most complex problems, poverty, energy dependence, fragility, were often lying right in front of them, disguised as something worthless. He proved that with enough patience, enough desperation, and enough perspective, you can turn the very things that clutter your life into the things that sustain it. In the end, the crazy farmer didn't just cover his roof with bottles, he covered his community with resilience. And every time the sun shines on Oakhaven, the town doesn't just get power. It gets a reminder. Look closer, the answer is probably in the bin.